Eleanor Grayson sat on the cold curb, her thin fingers clutching the handle of a battered suitcase. The street lamp above flickered, casting jagged shadows across her weathered face. At 75, she had seen her share of betrayals, but none cut as deeply as this. The night air was sharp, biting through her threadbare coat, but the chill in her heart was colder still. Her children, her own flesh and blood, had left her here, discarded like a piece of furniture too worn to keep. She could still hear the screech of tires as her son, Michael, drove away. His wife, Laura, in the passenger seat, not even glancing back. "We can't keep her, Mom," Michael had said to Laura in the car, his voice muffled but clear enough to pierce Eleanor's soul. "She's too much. The nursing home will take her." They hadn't even bothered to walk her to the door of the facility they'd chosen, a place that reeked of neglect even from the outside. They just pulled up, dumped her suitcase, and told her to wait. Then they were gone. Eleanor's mind churned, replaying decades of sacrifice. She'd raised Michael and his sister, Clara, alone after their father walked out. She'd worked double shifts at the diner, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes, her back aching from standing for hours, all to put food on the table and clothes on their backs. She'd stayed up late helping with homework, driven them to every soccer practice, and cheered at every small victory. When Michael started his accounting firm, it was Eleanor who loaned him the seed money, every penny scraped from her meager savings. When Clara needed a deposit for her first house, Eleanor sold her mother's heirloom necklace to make it happen. And now, this. The suitcase at her side held what little remained of her life, a few faded dresses, a photo album, and a small velvet box containing her wedding ring, the one she'd kept even after her husband's betrayal. She stared at the cracked pavement, her thoughts a tangle of grief and fury. How had it come to this? How had her love, her devotion, been reduced to this moment, abandoned on a curb like trash? But Eleanor was not broken. Not yet. Beneath the pain, a spark of defiance flickered. She'd spent her life giving, but she wasn't empty. Not by a long shot. Her mind, sharp as ever, began to turn over a plan. Michael and Clara thought they could erase her, but they'd forgotten who she was. They'd forgotten the woman who'd taught them how to balance a checkbook, how to navigate the world. And, most crucially, they'd forgotten that she still had access to the family accounts. Years ago, when Michael's firm was struggling, he'd added Eleanor as a co-signer on his business accounts to secure a loan. Clara, too, had given her access to her savings account during a rough patch, a precaution in case of emergencies. They'd never bothered to remove her. Why would they? She was just Mom, reliable, invisible, unimportant. But Eleanor hadn't forgotten. She knew every password, every account number, every detail they'd entrusted to her over the years. And now, as the night deepened around her, she realized she held something they valued far more than her, their money. Her fingers tightened on the suitcase handle. She wasn't going to the nursing home. She wasn't going to fade quietly into the shadows they'd cast her into. Eleanor Grayson was going to fight back. She stood, her knees protesting, but her resolve unshaken. The city around her hummed with life cars honking, neon signs buzzing, people rushing past without a second glance. She was invisible to them, just another old woman on the street. But she didn't need their pity. She needed a plan. Eleanor hobbled toward a small, 24-hour diner across the street, its neon sign flickering like a beacon. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and grease. And the waitress, a young woman with tired eyes, barely looked up as Eleanor slid into a booth. She ordered a coffee, black, and pulled out her old flip phone. It wasn't much, but it had internet access, and that was enough. She logged into the banking apps she'd helped Michael set up years ago. Her heart pounded as she navigated the familiar interfaces, her fingers trembling not from age but from the weight of what she was about to do. The accounts were still there, just as she'd left them. Michael's business account held over $200. 000 profits from the firm she'd helped him build. Clara's savings account had $50. 000. A nest egg she'd been hoarding for a luxury vacation. Eleanor stared at the numbers, her breath catching. This was their security, their pride, their power, and they'd taken hers away. Her thumb hovered over the transfer button. A part of her, the part that had spent a lifetime loving her children, hesitated. Was this wrong? Was she becoming the monster they'd painted her as? But then she remembered the curb, the screech of tires, the way they hadn't even said goodbye. The hesitation vanished. She opened a new account in her name, one she'd set up years ago for emergencies but never used. With a few taps, she initiated the transfers. Every penny from Michael's business account, every cent from Clara's savings. Her hands were steady now, her resolve ironclad. By the time the sun rose, their accounts would be empty, and Eleanor Grayson would be gone. The waitress refilled her coffee, oblivious to the revolution unfolding in the booth. Eleanor leaned back, her eyes glinting with something new, something dangerous. She wasn't just taking their money. She was taking back her life. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Eleanor sipped her coffee, the bitter taste grounding her. Her phone screen glowed faintly, displaying the confirmation, transfer initiated. The numbers were staggering $250. 000 total. Drained from Michael and Clara's accounts into her own. She'd done it. The act was final, irreversible, and yet her heart raced with a mix of triumph and dread. This wasn't just money. It was a declaration of war. Eleanor knew her children would notice the missing funds by morning. Michael, always obsessive about his business, checked his accounts daily. Clara, paranoid about her savings, would likely log in the moment she woke up. They'd be furious, panicked, scrambling to undo what she'd done. But they wouldn't find her. Not yet. She had a head start, and she intended to use it. She opened her suitcase and pulled out a small notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Inside were names, numbers, and addresses, contacts she'd kept from her years at the diner, from her life before she'd become just mom. There was one name she needed now, Ruth Carter, an old friend from her waitressing days who'd moved to a small town upstate. Ruth had always been a firebrand, quick with a laugh and fierce with loyalty. If anyone would help Eleanor disappear, it was Ruth. She dialed the number, her fingers steady despite the late hour. The phone rang twice before Ruth's gravelly voice answered. Who's calling at this ungodly time? Ruth. It's Eleanor. I need you. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. Ellie Grayson. As I live and breathe. What kind of trouble you in now? Eleanor explained, her voice low but firm, recounting the betrayal, the curb, the money. Ruth listened without interrupting, and when Eleanor finished, there was no judgment in her friend's tone, only resolve. Get yourself to the bus station. There's a Greyhound leaving for my town in an hour. I'll be waiting. Eleanor thanked her, hung up, and paid for her coffee with a crumpled $5 bill. She left a generous tip, a small act of kindness that felt like defiance in itself. The walk to the bus station was slow, her suitcase dragging behind her, but each step felt lighter than the last. She was moving toward something, not just away. At the station, the ticket counter was manned by a bored clerk who barely glanced at her. She bought a one-way ticket to Ruth's town, a place called Willow Creek, far enough from the city to feel like another world. As she boarded the bus, she took a window seat and stared out at the city's receding lights. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of freedom, The bus rumbled through the night, and Eleanor's mind wandered. She thought of Michael and Clara as children, their small hands clutching hers, their laughter filling the tiny apartment they'd shared. Those memories stung, but they also fueled her. She'd given them everything, and they'd repaid her with abandonment. Now, she would rebuild in her terms. By the time the bus pulled into Willow Creek, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Ruth was waiting at the station, her hair a wild shock of white, her grin as mischievous as ever. "You look like hell, Ellie," she said, pulling her into a hug. "I feel like it," Eleanor admitted, but she smiled for the first time in hours. Ruth's house was a small, cluttered cottage on the edge of town, filled with mismatched furniture and the smell of lavender. Over tea, Eleanor told her everything: the transfers, the betrayal, the plan forming in her mind. She didn't just want to disappear. She wanted to live again, to prove she was more than the burden her children saw. Ruth listened, her eyes gleaming. "You've got guts, Ellie. Always did. So, what's next?" Eleanor leaned forward, her voice steady. "I'm going to use their money to start over. A new life. Here, where they can't find me. But first, I need to make sure they feel this." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Feel it how?" Eleanor's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "They think I'm nothing. I'm going to show them I'm everything." Over the next few hours, Ruth helped her set up a new phone, one untraceable to her old life. Eleanor logged into her new account and confirmed the funds were there, untouched. She transferred a small portion to Ruth for her help, despite her friend's protests. "Your family now," Eleanor said simply. "Family shares." As the day wore on, Eleanor began to plan. Willow Creek was small, but it had potential. There was a vacant storefront downtown, once a bakery, that Ruth said had been empty for years. Eleanor's mind raced with possibility: ease a small business. Perhaps something to give her purpose. She'd always loved baking, a skill she'd honed during lean years to make birthdays special for Michael and Clara. Maybe she could open a bakery, a place where people gathered, where she could be seen again. But first, she needed to cover her tracks. She knew Michael would hire someone to find her, maybe even the police. She couldn't stay in one place too long. Not yet. Ruth suggested a lawyer she knew, someone discreet who could help Eleanor protect her new life legally. "You're not just hiding," Ruth said. "You're building something. Make it strong." That night, as Eleanor lay in Ruth's guest room, she felt the weight of her decision settle over her. She'd taken everything from her children, just as they'd tried to take everything from her. But this wasn't just revenge. It was survival. It was a chance to reclaim the woman she'd been before she'd poured herself into others. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and dreamless. For the first time in years, Eleanor Grayson felt alive. Eleanor woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of Ruth humming in the kitchen. The small cottage in Willow Creek felt like a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the cold curb she'd been left on just a day ago. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming her face. And for a moment, she let herself believe she could stay here forever. But she knew better. Michael and Clara would be waking up to empty accounts, and their fury would be a storm headed her way. She checked her Finino notifications yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She'd disabled location tracking and used Ruth's Wi-Fi to mask her activity. But Michael was clever. He'd figure out she'd done this, and he'd come looking. Eleanor needed to move fast. Over breakfast, Ruth slid a business card across the table. "This is Tom Hargrove, the lawyer I told you about. He's a good egg, doesn't ask too many questions, and he knows how to keep things quiet." Eleanor nodded, tucking the card into her pocket. I'll call him today. But first, I need to see that storefront you mentioned. Ruth's eyes sparkled. Already planning your empire. Huh. Something like that, Eleanor said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The storefront was a short walk from Ruth's house, nestled between a hardware store and a bookstore on Willow Creek's Main Street. The windows were dusty, the sign above faded, but Eleanor saw potential in its bones. She pictured warm lights, the smell of fresh bread, tables filled with people sharing stories. It would be a place where she wasn't invisible. Ruth knew the landlord, a gruff but kind man named Hank who agreed to meet them that afternoon. Eleanor used some of the transferred money to pay the first month's rent and a deposit, her hands steady as she signed the lease. Hank didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer answers. The deal was done in under an hour. Back at Ruth's, Eleanor called Tom Hargrove. His voice was calm, professional, but warm enough to put her at ease. She explained her situation in broad strokes: her children's betrayal, the money, her need to stay hidden. Tom didn't flinch. I can help you set up a trust, he said. It'll protect the funds and make it harder for anyone to trace them to you. We'll also get you a new ID, just to be safe. Eleanor agreed, scheduling a meeting for the next day. She felt a strange mix of relief and adrenaline. She was building something, piece by piece, but the shadow of her children loomed large. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from Michael: Mom, what the hell did you do? Call me now. Her heart skipped, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned the phone off and slipped it into her suitcase. Let him stew. Let them both feel the weight of what they'd done. That afternoon, Eleanor and Ruth went to a local thrift store to buy clothes, simple, practical things that wouldn't draw attention. Eleanor caught her reflection in a mirror, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with purpose. She barely recognized herself. Not the tired mother, not the discarded grandmother, but someone new, someone fierce. Back at the cottage, Ruth helped her draft a business plan for the bakery. Eleanor's hands flew across the notebook, jotting down recipes she'd perfected over decades: cinnamon rolls, sourdough, lemon tarts. She calculated costs, equipment, ingredients, permits. The money she'd taken would cover it all and more. For the first time in years, she felt in control. But control was fleeting. That evening, as she and Ruth sat on the porch, a car slowed on the street. Eleanor's stomach tightened. It wasn't Michael's car, but the way it lingered set her nerves on edge. Probably nothing, Ruth said, but her voice was tense. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, her mind racing. She'd taken their money, but what else would they take from her? Her freedom, her dignity. She thought of the photo album in her suitcase, filled with pictures of Michael and Clara as children. She hadn't looked at it since they'd left her. Maybe she never would again. The next morning, she met Tom Hargrove at his office, a small building with a creaky wooden floor. He was younger than she'd expected, with kind eyes and a quick smile. He walked her through the trust setup, explaining how it would shield her assets and keep her new life separate from her old one. You're starting fresh, he said, but you need to be careful. If your kids are as angry as you say, they'll come after you legally or worse. Eleanor nodded. I know. That's why I'm here. Tom also arranged for a new driver's license under a slightly altered name: Eleanor Grace. Close enough to feel familiar, but different enough to throw off anyone searching for Eleanor Grayson. She left his office with a sense of security she hadn't felt in days. Back at the cottage, Ruth was waiting with news. Got a call from a friend in the city. She said, Your son's making noise. Ellie. He's saying you stole from him, threatening to go to the police. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Let him try. I'm not the one who threw away family. Ruth grinned. That's my girl. Now, let's get that bakery ready. You've got a town to win over. Eleanor spent the rest of the day researching suppliers, her resolve hardening with every step. She wasn't just building a business. She was building a legacy. One that didn't include Michael or Clara. One that was hers alone. Willow Creek's main street buzzed with quiet life as Eleanor stood outside her new storefront, keys in hand. The sign above still read Maggie's Bakery, faded from years of neglect. But she envisioned a new one, Eleanor's Hearth. It felt right, a name that promised warmth. A place where people could gather and feel seen. She unlocked the door, the bell jingling faintly, and stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, and the air smelled of stale flour and possibility. Over the next week, Eleanor threw herself into transforming the space. Ruth rallied friends from town carpenters, painters, even a retired electrician who worked for modest pay and Ruth's homemade chili. Eleanor's hands, though arthritic, were steady as she scrubbed counters and polished old display cases. She ordered ovens, mixers, and ingredients, using the transferred funds with careful precision. Every dollar spent was a step toward her new life. The townspeople were curious, stopping by to peer through the windows. Ruth introduced her as Eleanor Grace, my old friend starting fresh. No one questioned it. Willow Creek was a place where people came to escape their pasts, and Eleanor fit right in. She met Clara, not her daughter, but a local florist with the same name who offered to supply fresh flowers for the bakery's opening. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor, but she smiled and accepted. At night, she and Ruth pored over recipes, testing batches of cookies and breads in Ruth's cramped kitchen. Eleanor's lemon tarts were a hit, their tangy sweetness drawing praise from Ruth's neighbors. "You've got magic in those hands," Ruth said, licking sugar from her fingers. Eleanor laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. But the shadow of her children lingered. Michael's texts had stopped, replaced by voicemails she refused to listen to. Clara had called once, her voice shaking with rage. "You can't do this. Mom, you're ruining us." Eleanor deleted the message without responding. She knew they'd hired a private investigator. Ruth's city friend had heard rumors, but Eleanor's new ID and Tom's legal protections kept her hidden, at least for now. Opening day arrived 2 weeks later, a crisp morning with leaves skittering across the street. Eleanor's Hearth opened its doors to a small but eager crowd. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and Clara the florist had arranged sunflowers in mason jars on every table. Eleanor wore a simple apron, her silver hair tied back, her smile genuine but guarded. She served coffee and pastries, memorizing names and stories as customers lingered. There was Hank, the landlord, who loved her cinnamon rolls. Sarah, a teacher who asked for gluten-free options. And young Tim, who shyly asked if she needed a part-time helper. The day was a success, but Eleanor's heart remained heavy. She'd built something beautiful, but it was born from pain. That night, as she locked up, she found a note slipped under the door. "We know you're out there. Mom, give it back, or we'll find you." No signature, but she recognized Michael's handwriting. Her hands shook as she showed the note to Ruth. "They're closer than I thought," she whispered. Ruth's eyes narrowed. "Let him come. You've got a whole town behind you now." Eleanor wasn't so sure. She spent the next few days on edge, jumping at every unfamiliar face in the bakery. She hired Tim, the teenager, to help with deliveries, partly to keep him cozy. Reminded her of Michael at that age, all awkward energy and hope. She taught him how to knead dough, her hands guiding his, and found solace in the rhythm of it. But the note haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that her past was closing in. Tom called with an update. Michael had filed a police report, claiming theft. But Tom's trust structure had tied their hands. The money was legally hers. At least for now. They can't prove fraud without evidence. Tom said. But they're not giving up. Stay sharp. Eleanor nodded into the phone, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. The bakery was becoming a haven for Willow Creek, a place where people like Sarah and Tim felt valued. She wouldn't let Michael and Clara take that away. She began to plan her next move. The bakery was a start, but she needed Maury a legacy that would outlast her. She started a free baking class for local kids, teaching them her recipes and watching their faces light up as they tasted their creations. It was small, but it felt like redemption. She was giving again, but this time, it was on her terms. One evening, as she closed the bakery, a man lingered outside, watching her through the window. He was tall, in his 40s, with a sharp suit and a calculating stare. Eleanor's heart raced. She didn't know him, but she knew what he represented. Michael's investigator had found her. She locked the door and called Ruth. "They're here," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "I need your help." Ruth was there in minutes, her truck idling outside. "Get in," she said. "We're not running, but we're not sitting ducks either." Eleanor grabbed her suitcase, her heart pounding. She wasn't ready to lose everything again, not now. Not when she'd just begun to live. Eleanor clutched her suitcase as Ruth's truck sped through Willow Creek's quiet streets. The man outside the bakery had vanished, but his presence lingered like a storm cloud. She knew Michael's investigator wouldn't stop at one sighting. Time was running out. Ruth drove to a friend's cabin on the outskirts of town, a secluded spot surrounded by pine trees. "Lay low here for a few days," Ruth said. "We'll figure this out." The cabin was small but cozy, with a wood stove and a view of the lake. Eleanor felt safer here, but the weight of her actions pressed heavily. She'd taken everything from her children, and now they were hunting her. She sat by the window, staring at the water, her mind replaying the note, "Give it back, or we'll find you." She wasn't giving anything back. Not yet. She called Tom Hargrove, updating him on the investigator. "They're getting close," she said, her voice steady but strained. Tom promised to dig into Michael's legal moves and advised her to stay hidden. "You've got the upper hand for now," he said. "The trust is airtight, but they're desperate. Be careful." Eleanor spent the next day organizing her thoughts. She wrote in her notebook, not recipes this time, but a letter she wasn't sure she'd ever send. It was to Michael and Clara, a raw outpouring of her pain, her love, her anger. "You left me like trash," she wrote, "but I'm not nothing. I gave you everything, and you threw it away." Writing it felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary. Ruth visited daily, bringing supplies and news. The bakery was thriving, with Tim stepping up to manage it in Eleanor's absence. The townspeople asked about her, their concern warming her heart. She wasn't alone anymore. Willow Creek had become her home, its people her family. But the investigator was still out there, spotted at the diner, asking questions. Ruth's friends stonewalled him, but Eleanor knew he'd keep digging. On the third day, Tom called with bad news. Michael's filed a civil suit. He said, "They're claiming elder abuse and theft. It's weak, but it'll drag things out. They're also pushing for a psych evaluation, saying you're not in your right mind." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "They're trying to erase me again," she whispered. "They're trying," Tom said, "but we're ready. I've got a countersuit drafted: emotional distress, abandonment. We'll hit back hard." Eleanor nodded, her resolve steeling. She wasn't crazy. She was angry, and she was done being invisible. That night, she and Ruth planned her next move. She couldn't hide forever. The bakery needed her. And she needed it. They decided she'd return to town, but stay cautious, using Ruth's house as a base and avoiding public appearances. The next morning, as they drove back, Eleanor saw a familiar car parked outside Ruth's cottage. Michael's car. Her heart stopped. He'd found her. Ruth pulled over a block away. "Stay here," she said. But Eleanor shook her head. "No. This ends now." She stepped out, suitcase in hand, and walked toward the cottage. Michael stood on the porch, his face a mix of fury and desperation. Clara was with him, her eyes red from crying. Eleanor's chest ached, but she held her ground. "Mom," Michael said, his voice tight. "What the hell are you doing? You stole from us. You left me on a curb." Eleanor shot back, her voice steady. "You threw me away like garbage. I took what I earned." Clara stepped forward, tears streaming. "We were trying to help you. The nursing home was a prison." Eleanor cut in. "You didn't even ask me. You decided I was done. But I'm not." Michael's jaw clenched. "Give us the money back, or we'll drag you through court. You'll lose everything." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "I've already lost everything. You made sure of that. But I'm building something new, and you can't take it from me." The argument escalated, voices rising, old wounds ripped open. Michael accused her of betrayal. Eleanor accused them of abandonment. Clara sobbed, begging for forgiveness. But Eleanor wasn't ready to give it. Not yet. Ruth stepped in, her presence a quiet threat. "You're on my property," she said. "Leave, or I call the sheriff." Michael hesitated, then grabbed Clara's arm. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. They drove off, leaving Eleanor trembling but unbroken. That night, she reopened the bakery, slipping in after dark to avoid prying eyes. Tim was there, cleaning up, and his face lit up when he saw her. "Miss Eleanor, you're back." "For now," she said, hugging him. She baked a batch of lemon tarts, the familiar motions grounding her. The bakery was her anchor, her proof that she was more than what her children thought. But as she locked up, she saw the investigator's car across the street. He didn't approach, just watched. Eleanor's heart raced, but she held her head high. She wasn't running anymore. Eleanor woke before dawn, her body aching but her spirit unyielding. The investigator's presence last night had shaken her, but she refused to let fear dictate her life. Willow Creek was her home now, and Eleanor's hearth was her legacy. She slipped into the bakery early, the familiar smell of yeast and sugar calming her nerves. Today, she'd face whatever came on her terms. She baked with Tim, teaching him her mother's bread recipe, the one she'd made for Michael and Clara as children. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it felt right to pass it on to someone who valued her. The kids from her baking class arrived, their laughter filling the shop as they shaped dough into clumsy loaves. Eleanor watched them, her heart swelling. This was what mattered: connection, purpose, a life built from love, not obligation. Ruth stopped by with news from Tom. "The countersuit's filed," she said. "Michael and Clara are backed into a corner. They can't prove you're unfit, and the trust protects the money. They're flailing." Eleanor nodded, her hands kneading dough. "Will they come back?" "Probably," Ruth said. "But you've got us now. They can't touch you here." The day passed in a blur of customers and warmth. Hank, the landlord, brought his grandkids, who devoured her cookies. Sarah, the teacher, asked to host a book club at the bakery. The town had embraced Eleanor, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. She wasn't invisible anymore. That afternoon, Tom called with a proposition. "We can settle," he said. "Give them a portion of the money to drop the suit. It's not ideal, but it'll keep them out of your life." Eleanor considered it, staring at the photo album she'd finally opened. Pictures of Michael and Clara as children stared back, their smiles a reminder of the love she'd once poured into them. She didn't hate them. Not really. She hated what they'd done, what they'd become. But maybe there was a way to end this without losing herself. "I'll give them enough to start over," she said finally. "But they don't get to win." Tom drafted the settlement, $50. 000 each. Enough to rebuild, but not enough to erase what they'd done. Eleanor kept the rest for the bakery, for Willow Creek, for the life she'd earned. She signed the papers, her hand steady, her heart heavy but resolute. A week later, Michael and Clara arrived to sign the settlement. The meeting was at Tom's office. Neutral ground. They looked smaller, diminished, Michael's bravado gone. Clara's tears dried. They signed in silence, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. She didn't speak either. There was nothing left to say. After they left, Eleanor returned to the bakery. The kids were there, their latest loaves cooling on racks. Tim had hung a new sign, "Eleanor's Hearth, where everyone belongs." She smiled, tears pricking her eyes. This was her victory, not the money, but the life she'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Months later, Eleanor's Hearth was thriving. The baking classes grew, drawing kids from neighboring towns. Sarah's book club became a weekly event, and Hank's grandkids started calling her Nana Ellie. The investigator was gone, and Michael and Clara hadn't returned. Eleanor heard they'd moved west, starting over with the money she'd given them. She wished them well, but from a distance. Her heart was here, with her new family. One evening, as she locked up, a young girl from the baking class hugged her. "Thanks for teaching me, Miss Eleanor," she said. "You make everything better." Eleanor's throat tightened. She wasn't trash. She was a hearth, a source of warmth and light. The money had been a tool, a means to reclaim her worth. Now, she had something better, a legacy of love, built on her terms, in a town that saw her for who she was. She looked at the stars above Willow Creek, their light steady and true. "I'm home," she whispered, and for the first time in years, she believed it.